Looks like we got a couple more people coming, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Justin. I work on our Tech Alliances team here at Zerto. One of the previous SEs moved over to Tech Alliances. Basically, my job is to know Zerto really well, but also to figure out how to integrate it with our alliance partners. This kind of sort of is alliances. Most of the stuff we'll talk about today, though, is just because it applies to pretty much every customer that Zerto has. I won't even ask you to raise your hand if you have a database, because I know the answer. Basically, because if you didn't have a database and you're in here at 4:30, there's plenty of good watering holes on the other side of the street. It'd be probably much more fun. So, went ahead and pulled a list off of Wikipedia of the different databases. I guess there's lots of ways to make a wheel. Generally, the ones that we see: SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, SAP. What I'll talk about today, though, can apply to any of them. And really what it comes down to is we don't see all of these, obviously. I'm sure you guys have them, but I at least don't know of any analytics that really digs into your stuff that I could see. So unless you tell us about it, we don't know you have it. So if you do have one of these other crazy ones, let me know. We could probably figure out a way to do the scripting and stuff we'll talk about toward the end. But again, I was just trying to find some of the more popular ones. So before we get too started, I know some of you guys were here for Oded's session, and I apologize already. You're going to think I'm really dumb after that session. Really smart guy. But wanted to talk real quick about what Zerto does just out of the box. Basic functionality if you just turn it on and don't do anything else to it. So Oded's session, I don't know if he used this graphic down at the bottom. I think it's his or somebody's. It's going to show us how checkpoints are created. So I'll go through the top couple here. We'll back that one back off. But you already know there's no agents, right? The exception to that is we do have a VSS agent, but I'll get into that here in a little bit. But by default, to move data, to copy data, there's no agent with Zerto. We replicate data at the block level, and we do that basically, I always describe it as kind of like a wiretap. We hook into the SCSI bus and the on-prem type hypervisors, and as data comes through that bus, through the wire, we basically make a copy of it, send it through the VRA to the other side. So a VPG, that's kind of what the little yellow boxes do. You notice that the ZVM is the guy, if I back this up, is the guy that sends out the checkpoints. The middle boxes are your VRAs there. This is how the checkpoints get created, right? So to keep write order fidelity on VMs, multiple VPG, or multiple disks in a VPG, basically checkpoints actually start at the source, and it's kind of like a posty note in like the write stream, right? So as it goes across, that's how we know that all the disks are, when they show up at the other side, even if they're out of order, we can then rearrange things and make sure that it's in order. So when I was an SE, I would always challenge DBAs, and just to raise a hands, how many people are DBAs and how many people are not? So are DBAs? Okay, I can keep making jokes, no offense. But, so I've never been a DBA. I've always been an infrastructure guy. But this is how we do write order fidelity. And if you were in the McKesson session earlier, someone asked, how many, or do checkpoints always become recoverable for SQL? And the answer was sometimes they're suspect, but they usually always do recover. So I would always challenge customers and say, do you really need VSS with Zerto? Try to break it. And normally 99% of the time they couldn't. And it was because of the VPGs. And went too far. And the reason it usually works is because it would be like pulling the plug on your entire data center at the same time. So if SQL couldn't recover from a power loss, none of you would probably use it. And Zerto looks a lot like a power loss for an entire data center if you recover a VPG. I'm sure you guys have all seen that slide too. So now let's talk a little bit about the actual database use cases, best practices. Believe it or not, we actually do have some documentation out there on how to do this. I'll go ahead and build this out up too far. But it's simple stuff, right? These are all listed in our documentation on best practices with SQL. I pulled out some of the ones that I usually tell people the most. But definitely a good doc if you haven't already read it. It's just tech docs on MyZerto. You can go out there, you can download it, just do like a Control F for SQL. So to go through these, basically the top one is just to minimize the amount of traffic we have to handle, right? So if you do disk-to-disk backups to like an F drive or something, make sure that Zerto doesn't replicate that because we really don't need to see all of that additional disk I/O. Same thing with page file and temp data. Unless you have a really specific use case where you need them, most of the time a database system is okay if you're not going to replicate those. So again, it'll just save some bandwidth. It'll make your journals a lot smaller. And if you're replicating to public cloud, that will generally equal a shorter RTO. The second one kind of goes along with the top one. If you're going to do local disk, just make sure they're excluded, disk backups. Everybody was in the keynote Rob just did a little while ago, right? The next one is kind of version dependent, right? So once we get to Zerto 6.5 and you can do individual VM recovery, this one's maybe not such a big deal. But right now, if you want to be able to recover individual VMs, you'll want to make sure that you architect your VPGs in a way that lets you do that. And last but not least, active-active clustering is not supported in any capacity. So if you think about active-active clustering, think of like a three-way telephone call. And again, if we're wiretapping between like A and B, but not between C and B, we can't hear what he's doing. And therefore, when we replicate the data, we're going to miss half the conversation. And that's basically why we don't support it. The technical reason is that if you turn on like the multi-writer flag in VMware, it blocks us. We can't even make that wiretap in VMware. So it's going to be quite an eye chart from where you guys are sitting, but I decided to put up an architecture between your shared disk clustering and your non-shared environments. It's always, in my opinion, better to have the non-shared. Again, I'm not a DBA, and we sell Zerto. So these are just normal VMs to us. There's really not any special considerations in terms of scripting or anything like that to make sure that if one node is active and then the other node is active, Zerto doesn't have to do anything. You can just protect one or both of them, and you're going to have a recoverable version of Zerto or of SQL. How many people have moved always on, like away from clusters, like the old clusters? How many people still have old clusters? Okay. Do you guys use Zerto to protect the old clusters? Okay, so like SQL? Yeah. Does anybody have like Oracle Rack or? Okay. Yeah, so if you have old SQL clusters and you don't already protect it with Zerto, there's a few kind of special cases that you have to take into consideration. And again, that's basically because of the two connections down to this shared disk, right? So this is what Zerto is replicating. Oop. Wrong way. So this is what Zerto's I'm not even going to use the laser. The yellow box, that's what Zerto's replicating. And basically, if it switches, so again, Zerto is wiretapping between the HBA and the yellow disk. So if, for whatever reason, we're wiretapping here, and you switch over to here, we don't see those writes anymore unless you're protecting the other VM too. So there is a script that will monitor for that and actually pause and unpause VPGs and all kinds of other fun things. let's go on here. So talked about this a little bit already. They're just another VM. You can protect one or all nodes. That's really up to you. It really just comes down to how much disk space you have at the recovery site. If you have a 5 terabyte database and you got 3 nodes at production and you want to replicate all 3, that we don't sell disks, so we don't really care. But somebody that sells you disks is going to love you if you do. But as long as there's no other special use case, if you have a primary and then maybe 2 read-only secondaries, you could protect one, you could protect all of them. It doesn't matter to Zerto. It's really just up to you how you leverage them. Make sense? So active passive clusters. Basically here are the caveats that, that I came up with. Basically we support protecting the active node. We also only support a 2-node cluster, and the other node has to be passive. And again, it comes back to basically just who's talking to the disk at the same time. You do have to have multi-writer mode off. And if you ever basically move over to the other node and come back, you have to force a delta sync. Or I think it's called, Wes, what's it called? Force full sync? Yeah, force sync, there you go. And basically what that does is, again, we don't monitor that other channel. That data could be written to the hard drive. So if there was ever data written to it, which if you fail over there was, we don't know about it. So the disk will be corrupt. So if you fail over to node B and then you come back to node A, you have to do a full sync. That way we make sure we get that data that populated during the other node. If you're replicating to a DR side, the easy answer is just to use RDMs. RDMs, Microsoft and VMware support as cluster shared volumes. You can use eager zeroed VMDKs, but Zerto doesn't create eager zero VMDKs. So if you're going to do that, you have to basically start the replication, stop it, eager zero the disk manually, and then start replication again. So it's kind of a hack to get around it. I don't know that we're going to do anything to change that behavior, but just make sure that they're eager zeroed. Otherwise, when you try to start up clustering, it's not going to work. So I wanted to go through that pretty quick. To me, this is the good part. Basically, we want it to work, right, when it comes up. We don't want to be there sitting with a SQL server that is dead after recovery. So sure our lawyer's not in the room. He's not. So per legal requirements, I was required to state the top part. Zerto 6.0 separates VSS support into a separate product. So basically, if you want Zerto and our VSS agent, you have to specifically have Zerto with VSS. It's a separate installer. And if you don't have that installer, we do not even have the VSS agent code in the product. So if you had it in, if you had it in 5.5, you automatically got it in 6.0. But if you're a new customer, you have to ask for it. And if for whatever reason you install the non-VSS version, the only way to get the VSS version is to actually uninstall Zerto and reinstall it. It's not really a technical thing, it's a lawyer thing. So anyway. If you have access to the VSS agent in MyZerto, so in the download section, it'll actually say like Zerto for VSS. So if you go back and you look to see what version you could download, that will tell you pretty quick. If it doesn't say anything about VSS on the download page, then you don't have it. The good news is that if you have to reinstall, you can export all the settings, reinstall with the VSS version, and then re-import. It'll cause a delta sync, but you're not going to have to like reset up all the VPG settings, push all the data, all that stuff again. So let's assume that you do have the VSS product, whether it's 5.5 or 6.0, whatever, or 6.5 when it comes out. Only one VM per VPG can have the VSS agent running in it. Probably not a huge deal because you probably only have one SQL server in a group. If you have multiple SQL servers, more than likely the best thing to do would be to use multiple VPGs because again, basically when we have the VSS agent do its job, it calls Zerto and says, hey, I just VSS'd all the drives and all the writers, and I want you to take a checkpoint. Well, there's no way to alert other VMs to do that. So basically, that's why there's only one allowed per VPG. Obviously, VSS is going to cause your databases to pause. And the reason I put the last line there is because there's some ways we can do things with scripting. So if you just get VSS out of your head and think of it as locking tables, flush all the data to disk, and then unlock tables, you'll be able to understand kind of what I'm doing with some scripts in the next slide. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on VSS, Zerto, before we move on? Yes, sir.
Have you seen any issues with your VSS interfering with other products, like backup products that also use VSS?
Oh, sorry. So the question was, is there any issues with Zerto VSS in conjunction with some other backup product, I assume, right? I personally haven't seen any. We only even trigger VSS when you run the agent or when you schedule it to run. So by default, it won't ever run or force the writers to do their thing unless you run it. I could look into it, but I haven't heard of anything. So obviously, if the writers are broken, more than likely it'll affect us and them, but I don't know that we break them, at least not intentionally. Any other questions? Yes? So the question was, where is the VSS agent installed? Basically, on whatever machine you want to be VSS'd. So if it's a SQL database, then you would install it on that Windows machine. Basically, it's just a little agent that calls into VSS and says, hey, do your thing. And oh, by the way, Zerto, make a checkpoint there. So whatever machine you want it to run on, that's where you put the agent. It's, I think, less than a megabyte. So it's basic stuff. I mean, it'll show up on the desktop of the machine, or you can schedule it as a task. It's like, I think, a bat file or something, too. Anything else? All right. So this is stolen from a Microsoft document. It shows what VSS actually does. It had a really technical, how-to. That's the link if you ever want to actually go and see it. I summed it down to something I can understand. And basically what it does is you have what they call a requester, which would be like the Zerto agent, that asks VSS to get ready to do its thing. And then the volume shadow copy service, the thing that's natively built into Windows, will go to a writer. A writer is like for SQL or whatever other VSS compatible software you're running. And basically it says, hey, we need you to quiet down, get all your data in order, because we're gonna take a snapshot. And then basically everything answers back through and says, yep, we're ready. Yes, we took a snapshot. Have a nice day. That's what VSS does. So essentially, everybody be quiet, flush all the data, and then, okay, we're ready to take the picture. Pretty simple. Any questions on that? So if you think about how it works, we can essentially achieve app consistency with some pretty simple scripts when we integrate it with Zerto. So Zerto's had a PowerShell commandlet for a while. I don't know when it was originally put in. That will allow you to take a user checkpoint via a script. In 6.0 Update 1, they actually added a REST API as well. So now what we can do is we can create a native script for pretty much any operating system to essentially do a lock, a flush, and an unlock. That's the term that I'm using for it. So, In like 2 more slides, I'll give you a link. I wouldn't tease you like that and then just be like, and ZertoCon's over, have a nice year. Maybe I would, but. So anyway, the reason that I started the conversation with there's lots of databases, I'm not going to show you how to do it for all of them, is mainly because of the second bullet point. If your specific database or application has a way to tell it to be quiet and flush data, you could do this with it. So here is a script example. The link's up at the top. Again, you guys can take pictures of it, or we can, I believe they're going to send you the slides too. But I'm also going to do a blog post about it, so within 24 hours, if you go to the blog, you'll be able to get all the links too. But anyway, this is the comment section, no big deal. We have a variable section in the script. Basically, what I need to know is some information about Zerto. I apologize that it's so small, but basically what I want to know is what's the name of the VPG of the VM that you want to do something to? What is the Zerto manager information? And then what is some database information? How do I talk to the database server? So in this case, it's MySQL. So I give it my IP address, the database, the worker, the username, the password. So I'm going to come over here a little closer. So basically, you add this is all in PowerShell, by the way, because it's Windows. So basically, I add the Zerto PowerShell commandlets. I connect to MySQL. I tell it to lock and flush all of its data with that command right there. It's a native MySQL command. And then I basically say, hey, I'm going to call ZVM. And this is a commandlet called set checkpoint. The set checkpoint command does basically exactly what our VSS agent does. It sets a user checkpoint. You don't get the pretty little blue flag, you get a gray flag, or is it a red flag? It's one or the other. Wes, which one is it? Come on, Wes. Yeah, good excuse. But yeah, so anyway, it basically, where are we at here? So lock up MySQL, call Zerto, put in the checkpoint, unlock MySQL. This whole process takes like a half a second, maybe at the most. I mean, it's a fraction of a second. The Zerto API is very quick because essentially you're just saying, hey, take a checkpoint. The only thing it needs to do, because it's doing these natively anyway, is just respond and tell you what the checkpoint ID is. This script is simple. It doesn't even care what that is. It's just, I do put it there, but I don't do anything with it. So anyway, with the script, I have a video of it on my blog. Basically, I create another script to just insert data like crazy. When I run this, the data inserts will stop for a half a second, and then they start right back up. And then in my Zerto journal, I get a user checkpoint that says, MySQL quiesced. And if I ever needed to restore, I would have the same options I would normally have. So, 5 seconds ago, 10 seconds ago, whatever. But if I run this, say, every hour, every 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever, now I have a copy where I know MySQL was quiet and there was no transactions in flight. So this is what it looks like here. It's a blue flag, Wes. So if you look here, I ran it, I think, about every hour. And you can basically filter these by going to select tag checkpoints, and that's what they do. So I would have all my normal Zerto stuff as well as this list of quiesced ones. Same exact script. I'm not going to go through it all. This one uses our REST API, and it's a native Linux script. So this is a bash script that basically does the exact same thing, but I can put it in cron. I can call it whenever I want, and it'll do, like I said, the exact same thing. So basically, log into Zerto, call my VPGs, log into MySQL, flush tables with read lock, and then basically down here at the bottom, unlock tables. So you could basically recreate this. If you had Postgres, you could swap this part out for Postgres. If it was Progress, whatever. Like I said, I'm not going to figure them all out, but it's a template. So pretty short session. I'm happy to take questions. I assume there would be quite a few. Again, my blog, I'm going to put all the links on that just because I know that we were 20 feet away. But yeah, so any questions or? No? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Do you have plans to support pass-through disk?
Pass-through disks?
Well, currently what I have set up, we run Hyper-V, and we have a two-node cluster of SQL Server 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a virtual source set in Hyper-V that allows them to run direct access to ones that are on their stand.
Okay, so like RDMs on VMware? H. Shlomi, that might be a question for you. Do we have any plans to support pass-through disks in Hyper-V, like we do RDMs for VMware? So RDMs in VMware? Yeah, pass-through disk for Hyper-V. It's late in the day, he's being very honest. I would say stop by the booth. Let me know, I'll document it. Basically, the way Zerto generally works is if we have enough people that want it, they'll get it on the roadmap, prioritize it. It isn't going to be tomorrow, but it may be something that comes out in an upcoming release. So anyway, I didn't get the blog post done, but if you just search for my Twitter handle on GitHub, they're all there too. So I pretty much published everything I can or everything that I wrote. And again, if you have questions, that's my email address. Shoot me an email. I'll do whatever I can to help you. I think right now I have MySQL, Windows, Linux, MongoDB. I've just about got my SAP HANA one done. So if there's anything else, just let me know. Cool. Thanks, guys.